The tension in the air was palpable as we took our seats around the lavishly decorated dinner table. The smell of roasted turkey and sweet potatoes wafted through the room, but it did little to mask the discomfort simmering beneath the surface. I could already see the glimmer of disappointment in my children's eyes as they watched their father's children from his previous marriage receive extravagant presents, new tablets, designer clothes, and toys that lit up like the Christmas tree itself. Meanwhile, my kids sat with their token gifts. A couple of coloring books and some socks. I felt a tightness in my chest, knowing this blatant favoritism wasn't new. But this year, it felt unbearable. I had had enough. This Christmas would mark a turning point. I glanced at the clock, realizing there were only a few hours left before the evening would officially end, and I knew I had to act fast. As I observed the dynamics unfold, it was clear that the unspoken rule of our family gatherings was that my children were secondary to their father's kids. The joy in my in-laws' eyes as they praised and lavished gifts on their real grandchildren cut deep. Each cheer and each compliment directed at them was like a dagger in my heart. Every year, I tried to brush it off, but the accumulation of these little slights had become too much to bear. My son whispered to me, "Mom, why don't we get nice things?" I felt my heart sink further, and a wave of helplessness washed over me. The emotional toll on my children was evident. They were becoming increasingly withdrawn, and the holiday spirit was slowly fading away. I needed to confront this pattern, or it would only deepen the wounds. I sensed the pressure was building, and I needed to decide how to address it before the night slipped away. As I observed the dynamics unfold, it was clear that the unspoken rule of our family gatherings was that my children were secondary to their father's kids. Each year, I would watch my mother-in-law's eyes light up as she showered her biological grandchildren with extravagant gifts, while my own were left with nothing but crumbs. The joy in my in-laws' eyes as they praised and lavished gifts on their real grandchildren cut deep. It was a pattern I had come to recognize all too well. The laughter and cheers directed at my husband's children echoed in my ears like a cruel reminder of the inequality that had become the norm in our family. Each cheer and each compliment directed at them was like a dagger in my heart, driving home the point that my children were viewed as less deserving. I still remember the first Christmas after we blended our families. I had hoped for unity, for a sense of belonging, but instead, I was met with a harsh reality. My kids received a couple of coloring books and some socks, while their half-siblings unwrapped new tablets and designer clothes. I felt my blood boil as I watched the glee on their faces, the sparkle in their eyes as they tore through wrapping paper, while my children sat quietly, their excitement dimmed by the glaring disparity. Even the simple act of gift-giving had become a painful reminder of their status in this family. Every year I tried to brush it off. I would tell myself that it was just a matter of time before my in-laws saw my children for who they truly were. But the accumulation of these little slights had become too much to bear. My son whispered to me, "Mom, why don't we get nice things?" The innocence in his voice cut through me like a knife. I felt my heart sink further, and a wave of helplessness washed over me. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let my children grow up feeling unworthy. The emotional toll on my children was evident. They were becoming increasingly withdrawn, and the holiday spirit was slowly fading away. I could see the way they would glance at their father's children, their faces falling when they realized that they weren't included in the same level of excitement. It broke my heart to see my kids struggle with feelings of inadequacy. I needed to confront this pattern, or it would only deepen the wounds. I sensed the pressure was building, and I needed to decide how to address it. With each passing moment, I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me. The laughter in the room felt like a distant echo, overshadowed by the discomfort that had settled in my chest. I wasn't just upset for myself. I was angry for my children, for the way they were being treated. I knew that if I didn't stand up for them now, it would only get worse. I glanced at my husband, who seemed oblivious to the tension. He was caught up in the festivities, laughing and chatting with his family, completely unaware of the storm brewing within me. The juxtaposition of joy and pain in that moment was almost unbearable. As I watched my children struggle to feign excitement over their meager gifts, I felt a mix of anger and sorrow. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Christmas should be about love, togetherness, and the joy of giving, not about competition and humiliation. I could feel my resolve strengthening, and I knew I had to confront this issue head-on. I looked at the clock, realizing there were only a few hours left before the evening would officially end. My heart raced as I contemplated what I needed to do. It was clear that I had to speak up, to advocate for my children and let my in-laws know that this behavior was unacceptable. I couldn't let another Christmas go by where my kids felt like second-class citizens in a family that was supposed to embrace them. No, this year was going to be different. This Christmas would mark a turning point. The moment came when my mother-in-law casually remarked, "Well, the kids deserve the best. After all, they're our family." My heart sank as I watched my children's faces fall, realizing they were being compared unfavorably to their half-siblings. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating any semblance of holiday cheer. It felt like a punch to the gut when my mother-in-law dismissed my daughter's handmade gift as cute but not quite the same. My daughter had put her heart into that gift, and to see it belittled was infuriating. I caught a glimpse of a hidden message. My kids were merely an afterthought, a footnote in this family story. That was it. I was done being silent. I could no longer stand by and watch this unfold. I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle in my mind. I knew I had to confront my in-laws and speak up for my children. I felt anger bubbling within me, mixed with a deep sense of protectiveness. I would not let my children feel less than. This was my moment of truth and I was ready to take a stand. As we sat there, I could see my husband's children gloating over their gifts, their laughter ringing out as they reveled in the attention. Meanwhile, my kids clutched their meager gifts, their faces betraying the hurt they felt. It was a painful contrast that highlighted the favoritism that had become all too familiar. I could see my son's eyes, filled with confusion and disappointment, and it tore at my heart. I glanced at my husband, hoping for some sign of support, but he seemed lost in the moment, laughing with his family. It was as if he couldn't see what was happening. I felt a surge of frustration. How could he not notice the pain in our children's eyes? As the evening wore on, my mother-in-law continued to bask in the joy of her biological grandchildren, showering them with praise and gifts. She smiled and laughed, seemingly oblivious to the heavy atmosphere that had settled around us. The more they celebrated, the more isolated my children felt. Each laugh, each cheer felt like a jab, reminding them that they were considered lesser in this family dynamic. The tension in the room was palpable, and I knew I had to act. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I looked around the table at the smiles plastered on my in-laws' faces, and I realized I couldn't take it any longer. This was not just about gifts. It was about love, respect, and the emotional well-being of my children. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. I felt like a lion ready to roar, but I also knew I had to choose my words carefully. I didn't want to create a scene, but I couldn't let this go unaddressed either. I had to find a way to communicate my feelings without being dismissed or ridiculed. My heart raced as I prepared myself for the confrontation. I understood that this was not just a battle for my children's dignity. It was about breaking a pattern that had been allowed to fester for too long. I was determined to create change. I looked at my children one last time, their faces etched with confusion and hurt, and I knew I had to do this for them. As the laughter continued, I felt a surge of adrenaline. I stood up, my voice steady but firm, and said, "This ends now. We will no longer participate in these family gatherings if my children are treated as second class. They deserve equal love and respect." The room fell silent, all eyes on me, but I felt a rush of strength. I had finally found my voice, and it was liberating. I could see surprise and disbelief on their faces, but I didn't back down. I gave them a choice. Treat my children fairly, or we would leave and create our own traditions. My husband shifted uncomfortably, and my mother-in-law scoffed at my ultimatum, rolling her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, Carol," she said dismissively. But I was resolute. I would not let them manipulate me into submission. The tension hung thick in the air as I awaited their response, knowing that this confrontation was a turning point not only for my family, but also for my sense of self-worth. I stood up, my voice steady but firm. "This ends now. We will no longer participate in these family gatherings if my children are treated as second class. They deserve equal love and respect." The words felt powerful as they escaped my lips, and I could feel the tension shift in the room. All eyes were on me, and I could sense the surprise and disbelief washing over my in-laws. I knew I was crossing a line, but I was done being the silent observer in this toxic dynamic. I glanced around the table, taking in the faces of my husband's family. My mother-in-law seemed momentarily taken aback, her mouth agape, while my father-in-law's brows furrowed in confusion. My husband looked like a deer caught in headlights, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I felt a rush of strength surge through me. I had finally found my voice and it was liberating. I'm tired of watching my children being treated as if they don't matter. I continued, my voice unwavering. Every Christmas it's the same story. They sit quietly while your grandchildren get everything they could ever want. And what do my kids get? A couple of coloring books and some socks? That's not fair, and I won't stand for it any longer. The room fell silent, and I could feel the weight of my words crashing down on them. I gave them a choice. Treat my children fairly, or we would leave and create our own traditions. I watched as my mother-in-law's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. Don't be dramatic, Carol, she said dismissively, as if my feelings were an overreaction. But I was resolute. I could feel the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, holding my ground, and looked directly at my husband. This isn't just about gifts. It's about how your family treats my children. They deserve to feel loved and valued, just like your other grandchildren. I will not let them grow up thinking they are less than, simply because they aren't blood relatives to you. The tension hung thick in the air, and I could sense the uncertainty in my in-laws. My husband's children were watching, their faces a mix of confusion and concern. I could see the pressure mounting on my husband, caught between his loyalty to his family and the woman he married. You're being unreasonable, Carol, my father-in-law interjected, trying to regain control of the situation. It's Christmas. You can't just take the kids away from family traditions over this. His tone was condescending, designed to provoke guilt in me. I felt the rage boil inside me. They didn't care about the kids. They only cared about preserving their status quo. I'm not taking them away from family traditions. I'm trying to create a new tradition that includes everyone fairly. I shot back, my voice rising slightly. You want to know what's ruining Christmas? It's the favoritism and the dismissive attitudes towards my children. It's not about the presents. It's about respect and recognition. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my children's eyes wide with surprise. They had never seen me stand up to my in-laws like this before. I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. I knew I had crossed a line, but it felt necessary. My heart raced as I awaited their response, knowing that this confrontation was a turning point not only for my family, but also for my sense of self-worth. Carol, you're overreacting. This is how it's always been, my mother-in-law replied, her voice dripping with condescension. And that's exactly the problem. Just because it's always been this way doesn't mean it's right. I shot back, my heart pounding in my chest. I refuse to let my children feel like they don't belong in this family. They are just as much a part of this family as your grandchildren are, and it's time you all recognize that. I could see my husband's face turning red with embarrassment, but I didn't care. I was done being manipulated by his family's toxic dynamics. I felt empowered, ready to take a stand for my children. I wouldn't let them manipulate me into submission any longer. The tension hung thick in the air as I awaited their response. My mother-in-law's expression had shifted from surprise to anger. I could see her jaw clenched, and I knew she was about to retaliate. You're ruining Christmas for everyone, Carol, she yelled, her voice rising in indignation. I felt a mix of vindication and relief. Her anger was a clear indication that I had struck a nerve. The facade of the perfect family was crumbling, and she was furious that I had exposed it. I didn't turn back. I kept my gaze steady, looking around at the shocked faces of my in-laws. I was ready for whatever came next. This was my moment and I had taken it. I was no longer a passive participant in their games. I was done being the scapegoat. The choice was theirs. Treat my children with the love and respect they deserved, or face the consequences of their actions. As I stood there, I felt a sense of power rising within me. I was ready to fight for my children, and I would not back down. As dinner continued, the atmosphere grew thicker with tension. My in-laws didn't let up. They paraded my husband's children around, flaunting their new gifts while my kids sat quietly, feeling the weight of exclusion. I could see my son's disappointment as he glanced at their tablets and shiny toys, then back at his own meager gifts. A couple of coloring books and a pair of socks. It was heartbreaking to witness my children's excitement dimming in the face of such blatant favoritism. "Mom, why don't we get nice things?" my son whispered, his voice barely above a whisper. The innocence in his question cut deep, and I felt a surge of anger mixed with sadness. How could I explain to him that their worth was not measured by the gifts they received? Then my father-in-law chimed in, his tone condescending. "Carol, you're not really considering taking the kids away from family traditions, are you? It's Christmas." His words felt like a direct attack, aimed at making me feel guilty for wanting better for my children. "You wouldn't abandon your family like this," he continued, attempting to provoke my guilt while I felt rage boiling inside me. It was clear they didn't care about the kids. They only cared about maintaining their power and the status quo. I could see my husband's discomfort as he shifted in his seat, caught between his family and his wife. I felt the pressure mounting, but I knew I had to stand firm. I couldn't let their manipulations sway me. I had already made up my mind. If they continued to treat my children as second-class citizens, I would have to take drastic measures. I was tired of being the only one to care about how my kids felt in this family. The dinner wore on, filled with laughter and chatter that felt increasingly distant. My mother-in-law orchestrated a moment where she asked my children to fetch her a drink. As they got up, she made a big show of giving her biological grandchildren their gifts. The room filled with laughter and smiles, and I could see my kids' discomfort growing. They stood there, awkwardly watching the celebration unfold without them. I felt my heart race. They expected me to rush in and save the day just like always. But this time I held my ground. I watched the atmosphere shift as my children visibly shrank back, while my in-laws relished their moment of triumph. It was the ultimate test of my resolve, and I refused to let them drag me back into the chaos of their toxic behavior. I took a deep breath and decided to let the chaos unfold. I didn't rush in to fix their embarrassment or discomfort. Instead, I calmly packed our things. The silence was deafening as I collected my children's meager gifts, heart pounding, knowing I was about to make a bold move. I turned to face my in-laws, breaking the silence with a calm but firm voice. "We're leaving," I stated flatly, feeling a mix of relief and empowerment wash over me as I closed the door behind us. The look of shock on their faces was priceless. I felt a wave of liberation wash over me as I stepped out of that toxic environment. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was finally taking a stand for my children and myself. No more would I allow their toxic favoritism to dictate our happiness. As we walked to the car, I could sense my children's relief. They felt it too, the freedom of stepping away from that suffocating atmosphere. As we drove home, I could feel the tension slowly dissipating. My children were talking animatedly about the gifts they'd received, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had made the right choice. I was done being manipulated by their toxic dynamics, and I felt empowered knowing that I had finally taken a stand. My children deserved better, and I was determined to create a new normal for us. One that was filled with love, respect, and equality. I was ready to carve out a space for us where we could flourish without the burdens of favoritism weighing us down. As dessert was served, the air was thick with tension. My mother-in-law orchestrated a moment where she called my kids over to fetch her a drink, and I could see what was coming. As she made a big show of giving her biological grandchildren their gifts, the room filled with laughter and cheers. I watched my children standing off to the side, their faces falling as they realized they were being overlooked again. I could feel my heart racing, and I knew they were feeling the weight of exclusion weighing heavily on them. They were expected to fetch drinks while the attention was all on the other kids. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. This was the moment I had dreaded. The moment where they would be reminded that they were just an afterthought. In that moment, I could see the discomfort growing on my children's faces. They stood there awkwardly, and I could see my daughter's eyes beginning to well with tears. I felt the urge to rush in to save them from the embarrassment, but I knew I had to hold my ground. I had to let them feel this moment, to understand that this behavior was not acceptable. The laughter and cheers echoed around us, and it was like a knife twisting in my gut. My mother-in-law was basking in the joy of her biological grandchildren, showering them with praise and attention. For a moment I felt frozen in time. I was torn between the instinct to protect my children and the need to show them that I was serious about breaking this cycle of favoritism. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I realized this was the ultimate test of my resolve. Could I really let the chaos unfold? My children were visibly upset, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks as I weighed my options. It was hard to witness their discomfort, but I understood that sometimes, standing firm meant letting them experience the reality of the situation. I watched as the in-laws celebrated, my mother-in-law laughing as she handed out extravagant gifts. My heart ached for my kids. I knew I had to do something, but I also knew that making a scene wouldn't help. I had to pick my battles wisely. I had already made my stance clear earlier, and now it was time to let the chips fall where they may. As dessert plates were cleared away, I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. I took a deep breath, and instead of stepping in to comfort my children, I calmly started to pack our things. I gathered their meager gifts, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. The silence that enveloped the room was deafening as I collected our belongings, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. My in-laws continued to laugh and celebrate, oblivious to the tension that was building. I could see the shock on their faces as they began to realize that I was serious about leaving. I turned to my kids and said, "We're leaving," in a calm but firm voice. The look of disbelief on my in-laws' faces was priceless. My mother-in-law's expression shifted from delight to confusion as she tried to grasp what was happening. I felt a wave of liberation wash over me as we stepped outside into the crisp evening air. Leaving that toxic environment felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I felt empowered knowing that I had chosen to stand up for my children. As we walked to the car, I noticed my kids' expressions shift from discomfort to relief. They were free from the burden of competition and exclusion, and I could see their shoulders relax as we stepped away from the chaos. As we drove home, the tension slowly dissipated. My children began to talk excitedly about the gifts they had received, and the laughter that filled the car was a stark contrast to the silence that had hung over us at dinner. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, knowing that I had made the right choice. We were creating a new normal, one where love and respect reigned over favoritism and hurt. I glanced in the rearview mirror at my kids. Their faces lit up with joy as they began to discuss their plans for the holiday season. I felt a swell of pride. I had taken a stand for them, and now we were on our way to creating a tradition that honored all of us equally. No longer would we be defined by someone else's preferences. I realized that this was just the beginning. I was ready to carve out a space where my children could thrive, free from the negativity that had plagued our family gatherings for far too long. I was determined to protect them and ensure they felt valued for who they were, not how they compared to others. This was our chance to build a sanctuary, a place filled with love, laughter, and equality. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. No more would I allow myself or my children to be subjected to that kind of emotional manipulation. We deserved better, and I was committed to making it happen. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. As the laughter and chatter continued to fill the air, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I had spent years allowing my in-laws to dictate our family gatherings, putting my children in the position of feeling less than, and this Christmas was the tipping point. I had to let this moment unfold, even if it meant exposing my kids to the hurt and humiliation that came with it. I watched my mother-in-law as she basked in the joy of her biological grandchildren, showering them with attention and praise. It was as if a spotlight followed them around the room. I could see my kids standing off to the side, their faces painted with disappointment. My daughter's eyes flickered with tears, and my son's expression was a mix of confusion and resentment. They were being overlooked yet again, and I felt a wave of anger wash over me. This was the moment I had dreaded. The moment where my children would learn just how deeply ingrained the favoritism was within our family. I felt torn between the instinct to rush in and protect them from the discomfort and the need to let them experience the reality of how my in-laws truly felt. As I stood there, I felt frozen in time. I knew that if I intervened, I would be reinforcing the idea that their worth was tied to the attention they received from their grandparents. But if I stood back and allowed the chaos to unfold, I was afraid of what my children would feel. Hurt, confusion, and rejection. It was a delicate balance, and I had to tread carefully. The laughter continued to echo around me, and I felt my heart race with each passing second. I wanted to scream, to shout at my mother-in-law for treating my kids like they didn't matter. But I knew that would only escalate things further. So I took a deep breath and decided to stand my ground. I had made my stance clear earlier in the evening, and now it was time to let the chips fall where they may. I settled my gaze on my kids, their discomfort palpable. I could see the tension in their bodies as they shifted from foot to foot, trying to make sense of what was happening. My daughter looked like she might burst into tears at any moment, and my son was visibly upset. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I considered the emotional toll this was taking on them. I decided it was time to let the chaos unfold, to allow the reality of the situation to sink in. I took a deep breath and began to gather our things. I calmly collected my children's meager gifts, and as I did, I could sense the shock from my in-laws. They were still so wrapped up in their own celebration that they hadn't even noticed I was packing up. As I moved through the room, I could feel the silence enveloping us. It was deafening. I glanced at my children who were still standing there, unsure of what was happening. I wanted to reassure them, to tell them that everything would be okay, but I knew words wouldn't be enough this time. This was about action. As I finished packing our things, I turned to face my in-laws, who were just beginning to realize that I was serious about leaving. The look of disbelief on their faces was priceless. My mother-in-law's expression shifted from delight to confusion, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to comprehend what was happening. "We're leaving," I stated flatly, my voice steady as I made my intentions clear. The room was silent, the laughter that had filled the air moments before now replaced by shock and disbelief. I felt a rush of empowerment wash over me as I stood there, my children by my side, ready to walk out of that toxic environment. The disbelief on my in-laws' faces was a mixture of surprise and anger. My mother-in-law opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and led my children out the door, feeling a wave of liberation wash over me. I had finally taken a stand for us, for our dignity, and for our right to be treated with respect. As we stepped outside into the crisp evening air, the relief was almost palpable. I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to dissipate as I closed that door behind us. My children seemed to come alive as the weight of the situation lifted off them. They were free from the burden of competition and exclusion, and it was a beautiful feeling. As we walked to the car, I glanced back at the house, the lights glowing warmly inside, a stark contrast to the turmoil we had just left behind. I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the family we could have been, and relief for the choice I had made. It was time for us to create our own space, one filled with love and equality, free from the toxicity of favoritism. Once we were in the car and driving away, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. My children began to talk animatedly about the gifts they had received, and their laughter filled the car, chasing away the lingering shadows of the evening. It was a stark contrast to the silence that had hung over us at dinner, and I couldn't help but smile. I had made the right choice. I glanced in the rearview mirror at my kids. Their faces were lit up with joy, and I could see them beginning to discuss plans for the holiday season. I felt a swell of pride. I had taken a stand for them, and now we were on our way to creating a new tradition that honored all of us equally. I realized that this was just the beginning. I was ready to carve out a space where my children could thrive, free from the negativity that had plagued our family gatherings for far too long. I was determined to protect them and ensure they felt valued for who they were, not how they compared to others. This was our chance to build a sanctuary, a place filled with love, laughter, and equality. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. No more would I allow myself or my children to be subjected to that kind of emotional manipulation. We deserved better, and I was committed to making it happen. As we stepped outside, the moment felt surreal. The cold air hit my face, a stark contrast to the heated atmosphere we had just left behind. I could hear my mother-in-law's voice rising in anger behind us, her words slicing through the night like a knife. "You're ruining Christmas for everyone, Carol," she yelled, her tone dripping with venom. It was as if she couldn't comprehend that I was doing this for my children, not just for myself. My husband stood frozen, torn between his family and his wife. My heart ached for him, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I felt a sense of vindication wash over me as I walked away from that toxic environment, leaving behind the chaos and hurt. My mother-in-law was furious, her anger palpable. She had been so used to having things her way, to controlling the narrative of our family gatherings, that my sudden refusal to play along was a direct threat to her power. I could feel her eyes boring into my back as we made our way to the car, and I knew she was fuming, but I didn't care. The facade of the perfect family was crumbling, and they were furious that I had exposed it. My children walked beside me, their relief becoming more evident with each step we took away from that house. As I opened the car door, I glanced back at the house one last time. I wanted to remember this moment, to hold on to the feeling of liberation that was washing over me. The truth was laid bare, and I felt empowered knowing I wasn't alone in this fight. I could see my husband standing at the door, torn and confused, and I wanted to reach out to him, to reassure him that we were doing the right thing. This was a pivotal moment not just for me but for him as well. We drove away in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, one filled with understanding among us. My children were still processing what had just happened, and I could see the tension slowly leaving their faces as we put more distance between ourselves and that toxic house. It was like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, and their expressions were a mix of confusion and relief. I wanted to comfort them, to tell them that everything would be okay, but I also knew they needed time to digest what had happened. The car ride was filled with an unspoken bond, an understanding that we had just taken a stand for ourselves. I could see my son fidgeting with his gift, a token that had barely held any value compared to what his half-siblings received. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me again at the thought of the unfairness they had faced, but I also felt a sense of pride. We had stepped out of that toxic environment, and we were on our way to creating something beautiful. As we drove, I turned on the radio, letting the sounds of holiday music fill the car. It felt strangely fitting, as if the universe was acknowledging our choice to break free. We were on our way to a new beginning, one where we could celebrate together without the shadows of favoritism hanging over our heads. I could see my children's spirits lifting as they listened to the cheerful tunes, and it warmed my heart. Eventually, my daughter broke the silence. "Mom, are we really not going back for Christmas anymore?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. I could see the worry in her eyes, and I knew she was trying to understand the weight of our decision. "No, sweetheart. We're going to create our own Christmas traditions. Ones where everyone feels valued and loved equally," I replied, my voice steady. It was important for them to understand that we were not rejecting family. We were rejecting the toxicity that had been so prevalent in our lives. My son chimed in, "Can we have hot chocolate and watch movies together?" His excitement was contagious and I couldn't help but smile. "Absolutely. We can make it a whole day of fun, just the three of us. No more feelings of being less than anyone else. We deserve to enjoy the holidays without that weight on our shoulders," I assured them. The thought of creating our own traditions filled me with hope. I could picture us cozying up in our living room, hot chocolate in hand, watching our favorite holiday movies. The laughter, the joy, and the love would fill our home in a way that had been absent for so long. I wanted my children to feel secure, loved, and cherished, and I was committed to making that happen. As we drove further away, I felt the tension in my chest begin to ease. I was finally taking a stand for my children and myself. I was not going to let that toxic dynamic dictate our happiness any longer. I had made the right choice and I felt empowered, knowing that I was breaking the cycle of pain that had been passed down through generations. In the following days, I began to plan out our own holiday traditions. We would decorate our house together, bake cookies, and create our own holiday cards to send to friends and family. I wanted to fill our home with love and laughter, making sure my children knew that they were valued and cherished. I envisioned us starting new traditions that were all about inclusivity and joy, free from the shadows of favoritism. As we settled into our new routine, I could see my children blossoming. They were happier, more confident, and full of life. The weight of the past was slowly lifting, and I could sense the freedom that came with stepping away from that toxic environment. I was ready to create a new normal, one where we could thrive without the burdens of favoritism weighing us down. Looking back, I realized that leaving that Christmas dinner had been a pivotal moment for us. It was the first time in a long while that I had truly stood up for my children, and I felt proud of the decision I had made. No longer would we be defined by someone else's preferences. We were carving out our own space, and it felt exhilarating. As we approached our home, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. We were finally free to create a life filled with love, respect, and equality. Christmas would never be the same, but in a way that was a good thing. We were building a legacy of our own, one that honored each member of our family equally, and I was ready to embrace every moment of it. In the days that followed, the ripple effect of our departure from the family gathering began to unfold in unexpected ways. My mother-in-law, who had always prided herself on being the matriarch of the family, found herself struggling to maintain the tight-knit image she had carefully crafted over the years. Without my presence, the dynamics shifted, and it was evident that her power was waning. The attention that had once been centered around her biological grandchildren now seemed to falter as they lost the enabler they had relied on to validate their worth. I overheard conversations among my husband's children, who were grappling with the sudden change. They had always reveled in the spotlight, basking in the adoration of their grandparents. But now they were left to fend for themselves, and it became clear that their self-esteem had been partially built on the foundation of favoritism. Without me there to provide support and balance, they struggled to keep the attention they were used to receiving. One afternoon, as I was preparing a simple meal, I received a call from a mutual friend of ours who had been at the dinner. "You wouldn't believe the chaos that followed after you left, Carol. Your mother-in-law was absolutely livid," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. I listened intently as she recounted how my mother-in-law had called an emergency family meeting to address what she deemed a crisis. Apparently, my absence had sent shockwaves through the family, and they were desperate to restore the status quo. "She was going on and on about how you were ruining Christmas for everyone," my friend continued. "But the truth is, everyone was just so confused. They didn't know how to react without you there to manage the situation." I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sadness. On one hand, it was a testament to the role I had played in that family, but on the other, it highlighted the unhealthy dynamics that had existed for far too long. My children had been caught in the crossfire of a battle that wasn't theirs, and it was liberating to realize that we were no longer part of that toxic web. As the days turned into weeks, the emotional toll on my children became clearer. They were no longer burdened by the need to compete for love and attention. They began to thrive in an environment where they felt valued for who they were rather than how they measured up against their half-siblings. I observed them blossom in ways I had never seen before. My son, who had been so quiet and withdrawn, started to open up, sharing his thoughts and feelings more freely. My daughter, who had once been hesitant to express herself, began drawing and creating art like never before, pouring her heart into her work without the fear of being dismissed. I made a conscious effort to foster an atmosphere of love and acceptance in our home. We began to establish new traditions that were all about inclusivity. One evening, as we decorated our tree, I watched my kids laugh and argue playfully over which ornaments should go where. The joy in their voices was a stark contrast to the silence that had once hung over our family gatherings. "Mom, can we make our own ornaments this year?" my daughter asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I want to make something special that represents us." "Absolutely," I replied, feeling a surge of pride. "Let's make it a family project. We can create unique ornaments that tell our story." And that's exactly what we did. We spent hours crafting ornaments, each one representing a different aspect of our family, our favorite memories, our dreams, and our love for one another. I could feel the bond between us strengthening as we worked side by side, free from the weight of outside expectations. As Christmas approached, I found myself reflecting on the emotional journey we had taken. It was a process of demystification, of breaking down the facade that had kept us trapped in a cycle of hurt. My mother-in-law's anger became less intimidating with each passing day. I realized that she was losing the grip she once had over our lives, and it felt liberating to take back the narrative. One afternoon, while running errands, I bumped into my mother-in-law at the local grocery store. The encounter was awkward, to say the least. She was with some of her friends, and I could feel the tension in the air as our eyes met. I braced myself for the confrontation, but instead, she quickly averted her gaze and continued chatting with her friends. It was a revealing moment. She was no longer the formidable figure she had once been. Her power over me had diminished significantly since I had stepped away. In the days that followed, I heard snippets of conversations that confirmed my suspicions. My mother-in-law was struggling to maintain her image without me around to uphold it. I overheard her telling a friend, "I didn't realize how much Carol did for the kids. She always made sure they felt included." There was a hint of disbelief in her tone, as if she were grappling with the reality that her actions had consequences. This revelation was a turning point not just for her but for me as well. I had broken the cycle of hurt. I was no longer the one who would bend over backward to keep the peace at the cost of my children's well-being. My refusal to play the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law had exposed the cracks in their family structure, and I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. My children thrived in the absence of the toxic favoritism that had once clouded their lives. They were finding joy in the little things, exploring their interests, and connecting with each other in ways that had been stifled before. I watched as they began to create their own identity, free from the shadows of comparison and competition. As we moved forward, I felt a sense of peace settle over our home. The laughter and love that filled our space were a testament to the choice I had made. I had taken a stand against the toxic dynamics that had threatened to tear us apart, and in doing so, I had created a sanctuary where my children could flourish without fear. Looking back, I realized that leaving that Christmas dinner had been a pivotal moment for us. It was the first time I had truly stood up for my children, and I felt proud of the decision I had made. No longer would we be defined by someone else's preferences. We were carving out our own space, and it felt exhilarating. Now, Christmas is a time of joy in our home. We make our own traditions, filled with love and equality. I watch my children laugh and play, truly happy for the first time during the holidays. We decorate the house together, bake cookies, and create our own holiday cards to send out. Every moment is filled with laughter and warmth, far removed from the toxicity of my in-laws. I've established a safe haven where my children are cherished for who they are, not compared to anyone else. When the phone rings and it's my mother-in-law, I listen politely but don't linger. I've learned to put my energy into nurturing my family, rather than worrying about her judgment. Her opinions no longer hold power over me. I can hear her voice on the other end, sometimes filled with frustration, but I've reached a point of indifference. I'm living my life on my terms now, and that feels liberating. I remember the chaos of that Christmas dinner, the pressure, the comparisons, but now I see my children blossoming without that weight. They are free to explore their interests and express themselves. My son is more confident, and my daughter's creativity flourishes. I've created a space where they can thrive without the shadows of favoritism. The victory lies in our newfound peace. I've learned that family doesn't always mean acceptance. Sometimes it means choosing distance for the sake of your mental health. I'm proud of the strength I've found in standing up for my children. We've built a new normal, one filled with love, respect, and the freedom to just be ourselves. I wouldn't trade it for anything.